Hey everyone, I'm Trent Kusters, co-founder and studio director at League of Geeks, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Today I'm talking with Alex Dracott and Seth Rosen of Ironwood Studios. Just a couple months ago, they released this smash indie hit with streamers, Pacific Drive, the roguelike survival radiated wasteland game where you're rolling around in a station wagon. We talk a lot more about it in the episode. It's a fantastic game. We'll get into it. But we do kick off, of course, talking about the origin stories. We hear about their favorite games, what got them into games. We talk about Alex's time on the West Coast at various studios and his experiences there. We talk about Seth's time working on BioShock Infinite, Mafia 3, NPC implementation work that he did. There's some really great insights from both of their times working in studios. And then, of course, we transition into both of them working as leaders in a new studio and the motivations for Alex kicking off the studio, the challenges that Seth came across when he was actually leading the creative side of the game. And there's some fantastic insights in there. So whether you're starting your own studio, you're in the thick of it with your own indie leadership at the moment, or whether you're just a fan of Pacific Drive, because we do really get into the nitty gritty of it and the finer points of survival games and big decisions in development. There's a lot here, and I really want to thank them for having the vulnerable chat and being as open as they were, because I think you're going to have a great time. So without further ado, here's Alex and Seth.
Olympic Peninsula, the crown jewel of the Pacific Northwest. Its unmatched views and quiet solitude offer everything you need in the most beautiful place on Earth.
There is no cause for alarm. Take shelter in the closest pocket of stability in your area, and please refrain from thoughts or memories of home.
The chain of events were in plain sight. Strange accidents leading to the government's claim of eminent domain and subsequent seizure of the peninsula. The evacuation of 100,000 people and the attempt and abject failure at containing the rumors that spread like wildfire.
10.
It was hours before Arthur came to extract us.
9.
Some zone secrets are best left secret.
8. 7.
I don't even look up at the sky anymore.
6.
Was she a myth, martyr, or monster?
5.
Nothing had more potential than limb technology.
4.
And look what it did to the Olympic Peninsula.
3. 2. 1.
I have the distinct honor to introduce to you the American people. A new scientific frontier with a raw power, the potential is limitless. On this day, we welcome our Faraday future.
Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I said
I love to be on the podcast.
I said podcast in my last episode and in the greeting somehow, and it was so formal, it kind of wigged me out. So I thought I'd just lean into it this time. So we've got.
I feel underdressed in that case.
Yeah, right. I should have worn my tux. So we got Seth on the east coast of the States, and we've got Alex on the west, and we've got me in Melbourne. So we've got a spread of time zones here. But you guys have just what? Oh, we launched on the same day. We launched Solly and Fern the same day that you launched Pacific Drive.
Yeah, launch buddies.
Launch buddies. Congrats. So what's that? It was about 2 months ago, exactly. I know because we just released it.
Is that it?
2 months or 2 months and 2 days. Yeah.
There is a time distortion effect post-release, that's for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. But hey, I'm really keen to get into Pacific Drive. I've been playing it, obviously. There's a lot to talk about there, but we start the podcast off the same way every time. And we've got two of you, so I'm going to bounce between the two of you. But as you may know, the way that we kick things off is, let's start with you, Alex. What is your earliest memory of a video game, or that like as a child, that moment with a game that sort of like changed your brain and set you on the course that you're on now?
Oh man, yeah, my dad had a bunch of older PCs, and I definitely remember playing like Chips Challenge and old like LucasArts demos at a really really young age, and I think right around then my I was gonna get my first game. It was gonna be mine, not my dad's. And I'd
Oh
been
yeah.
playing Dark Forces like the demo, and it was like you can either have that one or a sequel just came out with all the new fanciness, and I went for the new fanciness, and I got Jedi Knight, and that I think locked me down my track of fancy visuals and fun tech.
Hell yeah. What a series of games as well. Especially like your first game as a kid, your own one too. Did
Mm-hmm.
you just play it? And I remember when I it's so different, right? Like the way that we played games as kids, I think the way that, anyone does now, let alone kids, is like I remember I would like get one game and then that was the game I had to play for like just on repeat for a month or a month and a half. It wasn't like back to the app store and download the next free one or something. Do you remember just hammering Jedi Knight for
Oh
for a
yeah,
while?
I mean, absolutely, and I was not good at it either. So it was like do as much as I could, which was like get halfway through the first level and then get lost, and then learn how to cheat in the game and explore and like no clip through walls and everything.
Yeah.
It was good times.
Hell yeah. And so was your dad just into video games or was he in like comp sci or anything as well? Or
Yeah, my dad worked for Intel, but he wasn't super into games. I think he just had a couple of like demo disc libraries, like
yeah.
House of Games, Seventh Guest, Old Monkey Island games, just kind of lying around that I picked up and kind of fell in love with.
Yeah. Hell yeah. And what about you, Seth? What's your first game memory?
I think it would probably be. I knew it as Rosella, but I think it was actually like King's Quest 3 or
Okay.
something.
Right.
Um, and I'm the youngest of four, so a lot of my early gaming experiences were sort of like perched over the shoulder of one of my elder siblings,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
waiting for my turn. Which
A turn that
you
never
know
came, or were they good with the sharing?
there was a reasonable amount of sharing. I mean, I don't remember being like upset about how much of
Good.
a opportunity I got. I mean, with that game, that King's Quest game, like I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just
Yeah.
wandering around. Like I was not playing that game. I was just putting inputs into it. I think like another early memory around gaming was we had a by this point the floppy disks were no longer floppy. We had a copy of Mega Man 3.
Mm-hmm.
That was really good for hot seating because we would just all die
Yeah.
constantly because those games are hard as hell.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, high rotation on the turnover there.
Exactly.
And so, Alex, tell me about after Jedi Knight, and it's sort of like you're saying, getting you into effects, and the visuals in games and stuff like that. Like, was there a hobbyist period that came after it in your teen years or something? Like, how did that sort of influence your game playing and interaction after that?
Oh, definitely. I ended up I kind of like every few years would flip flop back and forth between like console and PC and but I was, playing whatever I could kind of get my hands on up until high school, where the school district that I was in had like a class to go and learn about games and like
Yeah.
actually
Okay.
making them. And so that was like that got me involved with Gmax and learning, how to make a Quake map and stuff like that, Counter-Strike map.
What an awesome class! That's so cool.
It
What year
was
would this have been, Alex?
I was my junior year or senior year.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, and
Wow.
I did that, and I did my first CAD class at the time, and that kind of got my feet wet, and I
Worlds
was like,
converging. That's awesome.
yeah,
Yeah.
messing with all kinds of different like ways of just making my own stuff, and just any any chance to poke at it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
definitely got a big kick out of. But then that took me to, I ended up going to OSU with a computer science major, wanted to make games, but at the time it was like, when do you do your first 3D programming? And they're like, oh, like your early masters. And I was like, oh no, I don't want to do that. So I went off to the Art Institute, and that's when I, actually learned about art. But that was until way later.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So you're like, you're not going to give me the keys to the code early enough. So you actually went and focused on art first.
Yeah, and I didn't honestly even know what I was gonna focus on. Like it was a bit of a strange thing. Like I was not. I mean, I played music when I was growing up, but I didn't draw or paint or anything. Like I very much learned all of my art chops in 3D. Like
Yeah, right.
I still don't like I learned traditional art skills, but it wasn't until years later that I was like, I should probably learn how to paint and really relearn color theory and get better at that kind of thing. And that was an after college. But it was at that time that I learned like the difference between waiting for 6 hours for a render and just playing around in Unreal and learning what real time lighting was. And I'm far too impatient. And I think that that kind of locked my path away from pre-rendered anything.
Right. Okay. Interesting. It really sounds like you've got that classical, like, technical artist origin story where it's just like kind of like terminal velocity, ADHD in every direction of like art code picking up a little bit. It's like there's like like you say, the poking and prodding of games seem to be the thing that, would I be right in saying that is just like making things happen on screen? And
Yeah, I like that, and I think I would set myself these goals of like I love this thing and I don't know why, but I'm going to learn about it and how it happens. Like
yeah,
I played like early Killzone. I think it was like Killzone 2 had come out and I was like, "Oh my
yeah.
God, like the coolest lens flares in all of games. I'm going to learn
Take that,
about
Michael Bay.
image-based lens flares and like that I learned HLSL, I learned Unreal, like I learned like materials and shaders and that kind of like continued investigation is kept going as my career has kept on. Where I just like, I have trees seem fun. Like let's find the best way to make a tree and how to make
Yeah.
lots of trees. And we're
It
good.
really is something that, like, I've never thought about it in this way, but games are a medium that they do reward curiosity with these like really rapid and really also really hard earned long term sort of like feedback loops as well, right? Like you're
Yeah.
curious about how, like you say, like lens flare. It's like, okay, they can just like you can just spend a year of your life just unpacking that, right, and making the best lens flares.
Yeah, and it leans to I just love tricks, like weird things
Yeah,
that you do in games to like hack around and pull off some magic, whether
yeah,
it's
work dumber, not
like
smarter, right? Yeah,
yeah, like okay, well we can't do this crazy I mean, using lens flares as an example, like there's white papers out for years that are like all about like the photorealistic projection of lens, and games are like, no, we'll put a big sprite on the screen, and like
yeah.
that'll work. I love every weird like strange technical art game design trick anything I hear along those lines. I was like, oh, cool, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Fuck yeah. And so, Seth, what about you? Like, tell me more about the Rosen family household. What you're one of four, or did you have your four siblings, or
Three siblings.
three
Yeah.
siblings, one of four? So, like, were all of you kind of games mad, or was it just like
No.
classic
I
'90s
mean,
kid stuff? Like,
like it was a situation where we like had the family computer
yeah,
and like we would very occasionally get a game and play it to death. Like,
yeah,
we sort of as a family went through Grim Fandango. Like that was another kind of
yeah.
early experience where
That's
we'd
awesome.
put a half hour in on it after dinner at
Hmm.
night. I There's another early memory relating to games where I was like authentically, I swear, sick one day, and I stayed home from school. And at the time, the computer that could play games was up in my parents' room. So I like heard my mom leave the house to run some errands or something, and I'm like, this is it. This is my
This
opportunity.
is your
I'm gonna
time.
play Doom. I'm gonna stay home from school and play Doom, and it's gonna be the sickest day ever. And I went up there and my mom comes back in and I like scamper downstairs back to my bed, and she's not stupid. She figured out what was going on.
Yeah, yeah.
And she like barges in and she's like, if you're well enough to play Doom, then you're well enough to go to school. So that was kind of my starting point.
What a line. That's such a good line. It's almost like
Yeah,
like one of those government PSAs or something like that. It's got that same energy about it, like a government
yes,
commercial.
yes,
um,
absolutely.
so how
And
did
then
that hobbyist, like, sort of, was there a moment in your teens where it sort of were you in the hobbyist thing, or did it sort of come later vocationally?
like so many other things in my life, it was about aspiring to be like my brother on some level. um,
See, I was the older one, so I desperately just wanted to be cool, whereas my brother didn't care. He just wanted to make friends. And now at 37, I want to be like my brother, because I realized that he had it figured out. The whole,
Yeah,
you
had the right
actually
of it.
had it figured out. Yeah.
Yeah. And in this instance, what that meant was that my brother had gotten quite good at Team Fortress Classic, which was a free mod for Half-Life at the time. And I started getting really into it too. And he was in a clan and he was playing competitive matches. And I got really into it. And I kept trying out for his clan. I never made it, which is just as well, because we didn't have a second computer for me to play at the same time.
No nepotism in the Rosen family. This is
no, apparently not.
Yeah, wow.
No, that developed much later. No,
in more meaningful ways.
Yeah. So I mean, I like was someone who was playing a lot of games like socially with friends online. Like and mostly like free games. It was not like kind of part of our lifestyle to like be getting the new hotness. Like I played the hell out of the Tribes demo because it was free, and I played the hell out of the Worms 2 demo because it was free, and they both had like online components.
I think as a kid, like one of my longest play times was definitely like the Age of Empires CD you got out of the Kellogg's box, the cornflakes box or something. Just over and over again.
And then, in terms of the sort of vocational turn, I went to like liberal arts university, a very small math department, which is where I started. And I took a couple courses that were like, more into the world of proofs and sort of formal math. And I was like, man, this is hard. What if I didn't do this?
And this was not as like a path into games. That wasn't in your mind at all.
No, I've always been pretty math brained. So it was just sort of appealing to me from that perspective. And in my infinite wisdom, I was like, I know, I'll do computer science. Like that feels like sort of applied mathematics. But what I didn't think about is that at a liberal arts school, it turns out computer science is just more proofs.
Out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah, exactly. But at that point I was kind of pot committed, so I stuck with it. And I like the bits of programming that we were doing, I did enjoy. And then got to the year that I was graduating, my senior year, and started thinking like, okay, I guess I got to get a job. What kind of job do I want? I should probably make software because I've got this degree in computer science. What kind of software do I want to make? Video games are pretty cool. And then in sort of classic form, I took that sort of not very well thought through thought and just applied myself in the most maximalist way possible. I probably sent out, I would say, easily 200, 250 like job applications.
Well, that makes sense. You're math brained. It's a probability game, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of these has got to hit.
My old boss is CEO of Taurus Games, a studio that I first started at. I'll never forget a quote. Like he used to go on these big long rants about like anything. Like you get called into his office to talk about one small thing. You're in there for like 3 hours, roller coaster rides, and there's always weird snippets. And one thing I remember in his big Scottish accent one time was like, "You want to know how to sell more insurance?" And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Knock on more doors." And I was like, I don't know how that relates to anything we've been talking about, but that line, those bars go hard, like,
oh yeah,
that's about the rest of my life.
There's some deep truth in that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're out there, you knocked on over 200 doors.
Yeah. I knocked on a whole lot of doors. And I was talking to Roblox, which was at the time this like nascent company no one had ever heard of. They were like,
and they got offered you stock options, and you were like,
no. Well, they got in touch with, like, we had a phone call and we were chatting, and they're like, yeah, like, why don't you come out and meet the team? And me being like a naive little baby, I was like, oh great, like they're just flying me out to meet people, like I've got this job. No, it was an interview.
Yeah. You know what's funny, dude? The amount of people that on this podcast and just friends of ours and stuff that I've spoken to in games, that there's something about game developers and walking into game development interviews, like ambushing themselves in job interviews. Like anyone else in any other career would know, any other vocation would know, oh, this is a job interview. But there's somehow like folks like just walking into places and being like, oh, okay, I'm at this whiteboard at Valve for 3 hours now with like a panel of people.
I guess this must mean something. So needless to say, I did not get that job, and I did not get those stock options.
Right.
And I ended up shortly thereafter finding a gig as an unpaid QA intern at a Russian company that had a 10-person office in the Boston suburbs, so they could say they were an American company.
Nice, love it. That's your poli-sci minor coming through there, right? Yeah,
exactly. And I showed up on day one, and they're like, "Oh, so you can write code, huh? Why don't you do that for free instead?" And I was like, "Why don't I? Great idea." Yeah. Anyways, don't do that if you're listening to this. You should be paid for your labor.
So, and this because did you grow up in Boston?
Just outside, yeah, in a city called Newton.
Right. Okay. And your childhood, Alex, your teen years and stuff, you're in Portland around?
Yeah. And also college.
Yeah, cool. So, Alex, like we've landed Seth at like his first, questionably whether it's a games or software company, his first Russian front. Which is how all of us enter the games industry. It's a very Seth way of getting into games. I love it. Alex, what about how did you land your first gig in games? Because you've, much like Seth, you two have you've got a long list of names here, in regards to amazing places and studios and experiences. So like, how'd you get your start?
So I was near the tail end of my time at AI, and they had effectively senior graduation game projects where a group of 20 students over 9 months would make a game. And usually it was kind of determined by the group of students, but there was a special opportunity happening where SOE at the time, based up in Seattle, was going to come down and mentor the group a little bit.
Oh, wow. Hold on one second. Just to jump in, Alex, did you say 20 students over 9 months making a game?
Yeah, something like that.
Is that not an abnormally large class project, or is that a thing in the States? Like, I mean, I'm on the board here at RMIT, and most universities here, like your final year projects are maybe they let the students choose, but it's usually 3 to maybe 7 people max or whatever. And the dynamics in that, you can imagine, are terrifying, right?
It's chaos.
Students, but that's huge. 20 students working together.
It was pretty much
just
the whole
put
class.
you all in a pit and give you some sticks and say, make a video game.
Pretty much. They'd have a teacher that would kind of guide you and effectively see what you do the first bit and then come in to help guide the second bit.
Yeah. Right.
And I was too early in my, because it was meant to be a senior project and I was a junior, and I'd heard that SOE is gonna come and do the thing, and I want to work alongside real game devs, and so I was able to sneak onto the team, and that work there was really early on Real. No one else wanted to learn this thing called the material editor, and I had kind of self-volunteered myself, and that's kind of locked my future in stone.
I know the exact kind of junior developer you were. The ones that come in the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed that everyone just leads into the front lines of some
oh yeah,
come into this bloody room.
It was it worked out well, but I ended up getting an internship up in SOE Seattle, and then that internship ended when SOE did their big round of layoffs that year. And I then did SOE. I ended up getting hired by them down in San Diego after. So that was a little bit of hindsight there. It was take any job, right? Right out of school, but go work at the company that just laid off a ton of people is a decision I think about in hindsight. But it was great. I got to go down. It was first paid gig and go work on PlanetSide 2, which was a huge thing for me. I played the first PlanetSide. It was great.
Yeah, SOE were a bit of a giant at the time as well, right? Because it was around this, to put it in context, what we're talking early 2010s about this point, right?
Yeah, this would have been 2011, 10, somewhere around there. But yeah, it was crazy. I played EverQuest growing up. It was the biggest source of strife in my family was this game requires a credit card mixed with, what do you mean you have to play more to get your stuff back? It was a disaster, but the people that worked on that game were just sitting alongside they'd gone on to make Star Wars Galaxies, which I'm a huge fan of, and EverQuest 2 and stuff like that. So it was very cool to go and work alongside them.
Yeah, you really do have these pinch yourself moments in games, right? It's those meet your heroes opportunities do come pretty hard and fast sometimes in games. It's pretty cool. Remember showing Warren Spector, like, and obviously, like many of us, like grew up on Looking Glass games and stuff like that. Showed him Armello one day when he was out in Melbourne doing a lecture. And it was early days for us, and he asked to be a tester, and I just like kind of like just blinked at him. I was
Excuse me,
bro, you can have my job if you want it. That's it's really, really cool, these opportunities. All right, so you're at Sony online, and did you say so you were in the Seattle one and then you went to the San Diego studio afterwards?
Yeah.
How long were you there? Because you worked your way, you ended up back in Seattle after that, right?
Yeah, so I interned for I think 3 months, which was I was in school and interning in Seattle. So every week I would drive up for a night, work a day, drive back down that night.
Oh, wow.
But then I went down to SOE. We shipped Planet Side 2. It started a year and a half. And at that point, I went over to Sucker Punch, which was in Seattle. And that was when I moved here.
Okay, cool. And what were you doing? Like, what was your role? What were you doing at Sucker Punch?
Oh, yeah. So at Sucker Punch, I was a foreground artist. So I was on the team that was like, this weird thing's got to explode or do something interesting or be a part of a cutscene. Like I worked on, if you play Infamous Second Son, there's all these big, crazy, like modular, destructible bases that are scattered all over the city. And I worked with a small strike team to like make that happen. So it was like me and a couple designers and an engineer and an effects artist. It was good.
Cool. Yeah. That's rad. And so that's the Infamous sequel, right? I imagine around that time.
Yeah. And I was there till then. I worked on the first Light, which is their kind of DLC for that game, and then got caught up in layoffs there, and that's when I kind of made the jump full time over to tech art and VFX. And
cool. You finally gave into the allure.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was like, when I was in school, there wasn't as like big of a perception of like, people will pay you to go make shaders. Like even like early on in my career, it was very much an engineering programming run thing, and like there's technical knowledge to learn. And I definitely suggested to engineers horrible shaders that I am very embarrassed to think about at the time, but like or in retrospect, but like it's exploded since then, right? It's a huge in demand role that I'm still like, I go talk to schools and like, more effects artists everywhere.
Yeah, it's a really great point, actually. As you were sort of mentioning it, I hadn't even considered that. Yeah, of course, like much like many other roles, like even game director or narrative designer, and game designer at one point, emerged as the industry and the medium grew. Like technical art became a specialty as well. I guess you were just a graphics forward programmer before that, right? Like
more like an artist with dangerously too much knowledge.
Just when you really said that, like I saw the meme, like of the two hands, the arms, like with like a graphics forward programmer and then dangerous artist on the other side. Yeah. So we got a few studios under our belt now for Alex. Seth, you've got an interesting storied history. So after your little Russian sleeper cell that you were part of, what did you do after that?
I took a little leave of the industry to make some money. I worked in financial software for a few months.
We all need to do that from time to time. Like it's very common. I took a leave from the industry to make some money. Yeah. that everyone just like stumbled like Obi-Wan on the bridge, like hearing that on the podcast.
And I tolerated that for a few months. It was incredibly dull. My job was basically to like wait for the end of the trading day and then remote into these like hedge funds servers and run an executable and click next. And if a error appears, someone working for the Russians? No, this is not. I mean, I don't know. Maybe this was some of those Russian accounts.
Crazy. So you were actually doing like after the day closed, you would be in there.
Yeah, like 5 o'clock hits or whatever it was. When trading's done and the servers can be touched and like the databases can be touched, it was like, all right, quick, remote in there and like do this thing so that you can go home at a sensible hour.
Wow, holy shit! It's like you and shop fitters, like mall shop fitters again. That meme. All right, dude. So okay, and then so you're doing that for a bit, and what you got over that as well.
Like,
or?
After about maybe 3-4 months of doing that, I get a call back from Irrational Games, who I'd interviewed with for a QA position, and gotten to like one of the final rounds.
Now, were you aware of them? Because they're obviously a Boston institution, right? Like,
I had not played
aware of them?
BioShock yet.
Yeah.
And I was certainly not aware of them as like a historical sort of like pillar of the industry, like all these, Looking Glass derived studio.
Yeah.
So no, I had no idea like sort of the magnitude of what I was walking into.
Bless you, you sweet boy.
I played awesome. BioShock 1 like in a flurry before my second interview. Just spent like all day going through it, and then a little bit.
You're like, this job could be dope. Yeah,
yeah. They got some cool stuff going on. Yeah, so managed to get hired as a QA tester at Irrational. This was like right before the second like big E3 demo that we'd done. So it was like a 15-minute continuous gameplay segment, and I kind of dove right in and was heavily testing that, and like we're doing like PlayStation Move support, and they needed a demo driver for that, and QA
so
being the people.
1 sec. Were you was it a programming gig that you got?
No, this was testing.
Testing, right? Okay,
yeah. So I was doing like normal sort of line QA, testing the game, smoke tests, all that kind of thing. The coolest bit from my time in QA there was, we like had committed to doing PlayStation Move controller support, and we like had some meetings over in London to kind of update Sony on how that was going, and they needed someone who could like actually make it look good because it was kind of janky. And being in QA, spending a lot of time playing the game, I was one such person. So I like strapped a PS4 dev kit, it was PS3 dev kit to my back, like went through security, like went through customs. They're like, what is this giant thing? It's like, don't worry about it. It's BioShock Infinite.
That was one of the really big ones, right?
Yeah, they were enormous.
PS3 ones are huge.
I remember. Just gargantuan.
Yeah.
And as I was doing that, I started kind of moonlighting on a volunteer basis. At the time, BioShock Infinite still had a multiplayer mode, and the way that you like adjusted your loadout in that mode was just like a UI menu. It was very kind of meta UI, not that interesting. And I was like, this is kind of boring. Let's make it rad. And me and another guy who was like trying to kind of get noticed, started spending our nights and weekends staying late at the office, prototyping a sort of firing range setup where, if you pressed a button to change your loadout, you'd be brought in, you'd like smoothly transition to this interactive space where you're rooted to the spot, but you can look around and, equip different weapons and vigors, and then kind of shoot them at these targets and stuff like that. And I actually have one line of code from that prototype that then shipped in BioShock Infinite to control like camera movements in response to UI actions.
So if you're listening to this and your game has ever crashed when you're playing BioShock Infinite,
hold on, no.
That's rad though. That's so like tester code made its way into the final game.
Yeah. It was like a single line to sort of trigger a camera movement from code, because that's where all the logic in the UI was happening, but we needed to like do in level stuff in response. Anyway, so I spent a bunch of time doing that, and that kind of like put me on people's radar. So when they needed some additional help to do initially VO scripting, they're like, well, that guy seems capable and motivated and already here. Why don't we get him to do it? And I spent about a week doing that before I got chucked over to the multiplayer mode to do some like systems design. So I was doing some like meta progression, like leveling through based on getting, so many kills with this weapon and that weapon and blah, blah, blah. And that lasted for about a month before they're like, wait a second, we're not going to finish the single player game if we don't get all hands on deck.
Yeah, when you said multiplayer, I was like, hold on, did Infinite have multiplayer?
It sure didn't. Yeah. It got cut about, it would have been like, I want to say maybe a year or so before ship.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit less. So at that point, my friend James Edwards, he and I had worked together at the Russian company.
Yeah.
I helped him get hired in QA at Irrational, and he got bumped up into production, which is like his discipline of choice. Before I made it out of QA, and he ended up being the producer for Liz Squad, the team, the like multidisciplinary strike team that was focused on Elizabeth, the
Liz Squad
in the game.
Such a dope name.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Much better name than any other strike team I've been a part of. So he was producing this team, and you know, they needed some like gap filling for someone to do kind of like almost character design through level design. And he was like, I know a guy that I can throw into the deep end.
I love this. It's like, you know, Irrational are like, let's make an escort mission an entire game, and they're like, who can we get to help us with that? Then it's just like Seth in the corner just testing the game.
No, obviously they're like a bunch of really smart folks that had laid plenty of foundation before I got involved in the strike team. But yeah, I mean, it was really cool because I wasn't like just saddled with like, no, you stay in your corner and do sort of the level markup of like how interesting she should find things and what emotion she should have when she's looking at those things, and where she can, you know, go and sit on a bench or lean against a wall or whatever. Like I was actually getting to have conversations with the programmers on the team and talk about like, okay, when people are in conversation, like, where does their attention shift? How is it different when they're a speaker versus a listener? And like, how can we sort of systematize that so that we don't have to hand script all of this stuff, because this game is enormous. And if we had to hand script it, I mean, we even actually, before we went on the full systemic approach, we tried hand scripting it. Like I actually, to your point, was the one responsible for scripting our attempt at a like hand done version of the beach scene. So you find Elizabeth in the tower and you fall down and you're at this like sort of very sort of Disneyland beach, and there's a bunch of little moments where she'll like stop and interact in a special way with like a medicine ball or some skipping rocks or whatever it is. So I like scripted all of that stuff up and showed it to Ken, and we're like, just play through it naturally. Like, you know, we're not trying to break it. You just want to see like, how does it feel if you like go through this in a sort of normal way? And it was just painfully immediately clear that it was not viable, because you know, like, she if she has like scripted spots that she's trying to stand in, and like you just happen to have the invisible trigger that sends her to the next one in the middle of a line, like there's just no accounting for that. Or not without weeks and weeks of work per like scene. So I showed them why they shouldn't let me do that on a larger scale, and instead we should indeed pursue a systemic approach. But yeah, then got to kind of participate in that too, which was really, really cool.
It's a great result as well. I remember the you know, the critical lauding of like people just in awe that you and the crew made this NPC enjoyable to like be with you the entire time.
It was a really exciting problem to be working on. And, you know, it was also just like a really exciting moment to be working on it. Like I remember when The Last of Us E3 demo came out, like the entire Liz Squad like gathered around a computer and were like frame by framing, like, okay, like, hold on, how did they do that? Like, are they teleporting her? Like, what's the threshold for that? Like, blah, blah, blah. And just trying to like reverse engineer everything. Cause we were kind of developing both characters in parallel. I think we ended up coming out first, but obviously like they had to make all of their choices about how Ellie worked at the same time. So it was like a pretty neat little moment as people were trying to figure out how to do that in a not annoying way.
So I'm keen to get back to Alex soon and talk about his official metamorphosis into a tech artist. But there are two other studios that you worked at that I do want to spend a couple of time on, a little bit of time on. Remind me which order it went in. Was it Clay and then Hangar 13, or was it the other way around?
Yep.
Okay, let's actually skip Clay and let's come back to that, because I want to stay on this thread. No, we're going to come back. Don't worry. If Jamie's listening, we'll come back. But the reason why is because there is a direct through line from the work that you did on Liz to the work at Hangar 13. So why don't you share that with folks here?
Yeah. So I ended up at Hangar 13 working on Mafia 3 because there were people at the company who had gone over there when Irrational had its doors closed. They jumped over to another Take-Two studio, another 2K studio. And one of the folks there, Aaron Contreras, was like the lead narrative designer on the project. And one of the other members of Liz Squad, Anand Chatriwala, who's a system designer that I'd worked quite closely with, was also working at Hangar 13. And the thing that those two and a few other folks were working on was what we called the living world. And basically, it's like all of the characters in the city and making it feel like a living, breathing place that like also cares about your presence and things like that. So they kind of, when they realized they needed some more help, Aaron hit me up and he was like, hey, like, you worked on Elizabeth, like you know a lot about how to make characters sort of feel human and grounded and real. Why don't you come and try and do that on a city scale? I was like, okay, yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people know, but for those who don't, Mafia 3 is obviously like a large-scale AAA GTA-esque game,
yes.
In regards to its format and everything. So
yeah.
The living world, applies to people walking down the street or stopping to have a coffee or, running away from your car.
Who's driving what cars and what cars are in what neighborhoods and because, it's a game that's set in the late 60s and like a fictionalized New Orleans, and you play as a half-black Vietnam War vet. So depending on where you are in the city, people feel some kind of way about you.
I remember that being a big focus of the production as well.
Specifically like modeled some of that racist behavior, especially as it relates to like the sort of hoity-toity rich white neighborhoods and like police force, especially where like they would respond in negative and violent ways just to your kind of mere presence, and especially so if you're driving the wrong kind of car in the wrong neighborhood, that kind of thing.
What an interesting challenge to do that in an authentic and effective way where you don't have this character that just seems like you're it's just been chosen but not actually carried through to full execution in regards to what that character's experience would be in a world in that time and in that place, even the the uglier side of it, but then doing that in a way that is sensitive and appropriate. And I can imagine there's even questions around folks of that same identity or background playing that character and having to then experience those things, whilst playing the game. What was the process internally? Did you have sensitivity consultancy and stuff like that, or?
They're definitely. I mean, I wasn't at a level where I was like that exposed to like where
that all stuff really interfaced,
who we were tapping and what we were getting back from it, but it was definitely happening. And like tried to also be making sure we were like play testing and like seeing like what if anything was like too much for players, and trying to make sure that we're bringing diverse players in so that we're getting like a reasonable cross section of experiences through that. But I mean, like I'm a white guy. Like I am not a person who's had a lot of direct experience with what that
like. I think racism feels like this. Let's try this.
Yeah. So it was a lot of like research and leaning on the sensitivity readers and stuff like that we did have, and members of the team that were from marginalized groups and like making sure that we were really placing weight and seriousness on their feedback and their input.
A lot of listening and learning. All right. Well, now my final question on that before we swing back to Alex is, as a developer that spent so much of your career like helping NPCs sort of feel grounded and alive, not only on a very intimate scale where it's you and this other NPC for the whole game, at the hip, but through to the city scale thing. What do you have any sort of like pillars or things that you find, like are must-haves for like an NPC, or little tricks or things that, developers trying to, and even things like on a budget, it's very easy now with Unreal and, other engines to just get a shooter up and running and get it looking good. You can do that with a pretty lean team, or and it doesn't need to be a shooter, but a first person game or something with NPCs. But that work, obviously, as you know, there's a lot in there. What have you found is really like some of the quick wins or some of the big don't go there sort of challenges?
So I'll briefly plug the GDC talk that I did several years ago, which I believe is up for free on YouTube at this point, where I go much more in depth on this stuff if you're curious to hear me yammer on for even longer about it.
What's it called? Do you remember the title of it?
Oh, that's it was Level Design in a Day. It was like something like bring your level to life with AI. I think it was something like that.
The name Seth Rosen and that. Yep.
All right. So the like tidbits that I would mention from that and from my general learnings is like it's the small stuff that matters. Like there's kind of this balance between you want to play to the back of the room, like you need kind of like big gestures for them to read from distance, but you also don't want it to be like so exaggerated, and like you also don't want it to be like too naturalistic. Like you if you watch like a Disney movie or a Pixar movie, like a lot of the ways that those characters move are very cartoonish. Like it's not realistic human movement in a lot of cases. Like they don't have like
pantomime almost.
Yeah, exactly. And on Mafia 3, we even struggled a little bit where like we had a bunch of mocap for, people doing kind of mundane actions on the side of the street. And it was like, you could see where the loops in the animation were because there was like little extra bits of like human movement in there. And that makes it feel more robotic actually than the like sort of expressive abstract version of it. So that's one thing. But then, the flip side of that is like, you kind of need like the little ticks and like, sort of like idle behaviors, like things that just, even when they're not doing anything, make a character feel like they have some presence. Because if they just kind of like stand stock still and stare straight at you, like it gets real uncanny real fast. Like you want them kind of glancing around the environment and like having their vision rest on something for a little bit longer and having like randomness in that, like all those kinds of things. And then the other things I'll mention are like sound design is a huge part of it. Because that is the primary way to draw players' attention to action. Like if it's not already happening in front of them, audio or like, big bodacious effects are kind of the only things in your toolkit to kind of meaningfully draw attention into a particular direction. So leaning on that was a big thing. Like Liz would have all these little like sort of attention getting lines so that we would kind of get the player to look at her when we wanted her to do something and like sort of put on a little show for you. Yeah, those are the things that leap to mind. I mean, if
just like
I could
heaps of
go on and on about this.
Yeah, of course, we're not here for that. But it was, it's really worth drawing some of those little pearls of wisdom out of you. You spent so long doing it. And I imagine there's so many people now. We can all even if it's just a small amount of interaction or some sort of restrained NPC interaction, these small things will help folks. So, Alex, let's swing back to you. You've got the gun and the badge now. You're a technical artist. Well, it's like, do they just let the leash off and you just run around the range, or like tell me what that sort of meant for you if it did in any way.
I mean, it was interesting. Like I through from like the first time I touched Unreal all the way through to when I left Sucker Punch, I was doing tech art stuff.
Yeah.
Like, either it was tons and tons of hours at home just constantly learning, or it was like grabbing lunch and talking with rendering engineers, or trying to be as involved in tech art related conversations that I could on the environment art side. And when I when I was laid off from Sucker Punch, I ended up bouncing around to a bunch of different freelance jobs, many of which were tech art centric because that need was growing, right? Of hey, we want to do X or Y thing, but it's more than just like a prop, but it is there's VFX involved, there's a crazy shader involved, like a VR was starting to pop off at that time as well.
Right.
So I did I did like probably close to a year's worth of work on various freelance jobs, like art installation work, uh, random startups that I joined with for like 6 months, something like that, where I was doing any and all things like applied for tech art that I possibly could. I was doing some freelance with side effects, so I was learning about Houdini a little bit.
Oh,
Again,
cool.
just enough to do damage, not actually like pursue a full-time career in it. And then I ended up landing at Oculus, where I was their effects artist on, and then eventually the lead effects artist for their evangelization team.
Oh, cool. Was
So
that demos, or was it assisting devs, or?
it was very much like it was like a small, like 25 person team that was like, we need to show off this new piece of tech either at a trade show, but most of it ended up being NUXes, like new user experiences. So like you buy the Oculus headset, you got your touch controllers for the first time, you're going to play a little experience of the robot in a trailer. Like that was
Yeah,
the
okay.
team that I was on made that experience.
Right, yeah. So
Um,
you're making like an internal team making like little experiences or apps and stuff to showcase new stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then, that eventually grew as VR grew at Oculus and Facebook, and the two kind of merged together more. And eventually the need for effects kind of grew beyond just one team and grew into like a greater like, oh, maybe we should have some kind of like art org, digital org. And so then it became a lot more of like looking at VFX across like multiple different teams and trying to help guide there. And then I eventually left to start Ironwood. But like that team itself was great. It was fun because there at the time, especially the years before it, there weren't tech art answers. Like performance is king in VR, and so
Yeah.
a lot of the tricks that we had used in real time like just don't work. And there was like a trend to move towards geometry based effects.
Right.
Um, that meant that like we were actually looking even farther back to like tricks used on like Doom 3 and stuff like that, because it
More
was just
sprite
cheaper.
based, or?
Yeah, like clever sprite based techniques that were geometry, like positional rather than camera facing cards. 'Cause camera facing
Right.
cards are always like a dead giveaway. So a lot
Yeah.
of my job was just was probably a mix between whatever weird VFX thing that we were trying to solve or test, and then we found out that like there's a big win for like big special moments.
Yeah.
So at the end of that first contact trailer demo, this entire like we needed a way to end the demo. It was like we needed to end it cool and in an interesting way, and so I got to work with a couple tech artists to figure out this giant sequence where the whole thing kind of dissolves into nothing. And we took that experience, then brought it forward to other projects of like, okay, now we have a mobile headset. How do we have a moment that like super like
I thought you
impresses
were going to say you
people?
just started disintegrating everyone else's games.
No, I definitely disintegrated plenty of stuff, but no, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of like the second project that I got to do. We called them wow moments. Was like a
Right.
moment that was just like show a new user something that's making them gonna go like, holy shit, this is awesome.
Yeah.
But do it really quickly, do it concisely. Don't make them sick. Like it's got to be like easily readable.
And
And
it's
then
got to
it
be
became
cheap
like a
as well, right?
yeah, like and it's got to be performant, but also look impressive. It was fun. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed that.
Did you feel through that time, or like, or actually, did you feel coming out of it that you'd kind of, Goku like working like with 1,000% gravity or whatever, right? Like, did it feel like you were like training with weights on at Oculus, and then you came off and you're like, all right, let's go.
I mean, it's definitely helped, like without a doubt. There's tricks and techniques that I learned in the restricted environment that when you go back to like a more open-ended, like traditional performance environment, you can do
Mm.
more of.
And then I insisted on having like rear view mirror, and the weights went
Yeah,
back on.
yeah, that all brought it back down. No, it was that, but it was also a lot of just general like good to learn tricks that I don't think I would have gotten traditionally. So like
Yeah.
in Pacific Drive, we have a bunch of options, which is something Seth and I both care a lot about. And when it comes to like motion sensitivity, a lot of those options that we have in the game that are relevant because you're driving and
Mm.
there's a cockpit and sometimes that makes people nauseous. We took inspiration from things that I knew would make people uncomfortable in VR, and ways to combat that, like fading things around the edges, being like
Yeah.
hyper aware of rapid acceleration and deceleration. We took those settings and then we put them into Pacific Drive. So there was learning on a lot of different fronts that kind of carried through, because I think the best part about that job was just we did a lot of projects.
Yeah.
I think we shipped 7 while I was there in 3.5 years, and there was a lot of opportunity for just quick iteration. And none of the projects were particularly big. The team that I was on did do bigger projects before I got there, but it meant that we were constantly like, all right, new tech, new thing, new piece of hardware, new challenge. Like, very quickly take what we learned and test new things, prototype heavily, that kind of thing.
There's, it's really funny. I've said it on the podcast a number of times, but I think there is no greater way to learn how to be. I don't even mean to learn how to make games or to learn how to be a good programmer. I mean to learn how to be a better game developer. It doesn't matter what role you're in, but the fastest and most effective way to do it is to just go through that pitch to ship cycle like as many times as possible. And I would even posit that it doesn't need to be like on big AAA games. You spend 4 years on them or 5 years on them or something. It could be, like you're saying, it could be 7 games in 3 years. And the things that you learn by the decisions that you have to make to like cut things or make those choices that are performant, or as a designer, like really try and think forward to the end product and what the player is going to interact with in their critical path. Did you feel that those going through that iteration like so many times rapidly was as valuable like that?
It was incredible. And I mean, I've been a huge proponent of that. Like I was doing game jams back in college, and I did them for quite a long while, just until the rest of work just gets too busy. But like, they're huge opportunities. And like, I was at Sucker Punch for a little bit while this is like before Ghost of Tsushima became a thing, but like saw what like AAA like early like ideation started to look like. And then at a couple of the startups that I was at, seeing projects just form out of nothing, getting pitched to different companies, and then obviously Oculus, and then eventually Ironwood. And trying to pitch a weird idea about a station wagon.
So because I'm keen to get to the Ironwood thing, but I want to swing back to Seth and close off his sort of loop so that we can then talk to you about the founding of Ironwood. But I'm really keen, before we get to that, because as someone who has started their own company, been a studio founder and head for 13 years now, and knowing so many others, there's a particular type of brain rot that happens like a few years out from starting your own studio, where you're like, maybe I should just do my own fucking thing. Right? Like, and there's generally a motivation that may come from anywhere. Did you feel that at this point in your career? Were you like, and I mean, as you mentioned, you've been a victim of layoffs a couple of times. I had an episode recently where someone was talking about founding their studio because it sort of meant they had, a locum of control over layoffs or even their own job security. Could you feel that motivation at these times, like through these last studios, like Highwire or Oculus? Was it something, a goal you had from the start?
Yeah, I think so I've always, like, the entire time I've been working, I've always been making personal art, and trying to tell little miniature stories, either in an image or a series of images or video. And like, I primarily wanted to, like, especially at the start, was like, I want to just do this. Like, even if it means I do this and then have to freelance, like that was the initial idea and goal behind it. But it very, very, very quickly turned into, I wanted to make a place that I would want to work at, or I want my friends and professional coworkers to work at, because we've all experienced negative things in the industry. And so a lot of the foundational elements from Ironwood came from talking with people and hearing what their negative experiences would look like. Like, working at small studios and then working at giant companies like Facebook, there are positives and negatives to all of them. And having very much emotional reactions to the stuff that I've been through, but wanting to try and do as good of a job as I could. And that eventually became the motivating force. And that or not eventually, very quickly, I should say. Like, the second it wasn't more than just an idea that I had, right? Like, I had done a small indie thing on the side, like, while I was at Oculus, but that didn't go anywhere. Like, it didn't even, like, there was no announcement to Twitter, nothing like that. It was just like, I'm gonna make a game. And this one was like, all right, like, it was enough for me to learn what quarterlies were. And so, like, this one became an opportunity to try and put like a legitimate best foot forward, like to try and go pitch the game. that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing, the environments that we can create and what good can come, whether it's a game, but also, a studio, like the power that like the negative space that arises from carving out what you don't like of an experience, and just focusing on
Site-based
like
game
that.
design or company
Yeah.
foundation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. So Seth, let's kick over to you now because I'm keen to hear about Clay, and then you also did your own indie thing for a while there as well too. So
Yeah.
like,
Yep.
let's talk about Clay.
Yeah, so in the wake of Bioshock Infinite shipping, there wasn't much happening at the studio, and it sure kind of felt like the writing might be on the wall. So I started poking around at some other options, and I saw a job listing for a technical designer at Clay, and I applied, and our friend Nels was the one that kind of pointed me to it and encouraged me to apply. At the time, the theme and variation, I had not played Don't Starve.
You also did not know it was a job interview as well.
This time I knew that part. I was
Yeah, you
prepared for the
figure, all right,
interview.
we're getting there slowly.
I played about 4 hours of Don't Starve the night before my interview.
Right. Yeah.
And ended up accepting the job, having not been to Vancouver and knowing only Nels in town. It turned out he didn't know that, to his credit, though I will harass him endlessly about this. He didn't realize that he was going to be leaving shortly thereafter, but we ended up overlapping for like literally 2 days.
And the Nels we're referred to as famously lead designer on Mark of the Ninja.
Mark of the Ninja.
One of Clay's first breakout hits. Yeah.
Yep. Anyways, so I went out there, and I thought at the time, in sort of a delightful potential full circle moment, they had a bid in for the King's Quest reboot, the like modern rendition that was
cool.
that ended up getting made. I forget by who. So at the time when I accepted the job, I thought I was going to be showing up and working on that. And the writer on Mark the Ninja, Chris Dolan, was based in the Boston area, so I knew him already, and we got together for drinks, and we're kind of like getting excited about some of the things we could do with King's Quest. And then I showed up on day one, and once again was told like, oh, by the way, that thing that you thought you were doing, you're not doing that. And in this case, it was I was asked to make a total conversion horror mod for Don't Starve, to kind of show off our modding tools, and get my feet wet with like that engine and tools. So I started learning Lua that day.
Well, it's the type of like defense stuff that like it just, I think you can be the type of developer or person that sort of recoils from that stuff. And I mean, what like Instagram influencer, whatever would call it, like a growth mindset, right? Or you're the type of person who like dives in and has that growth mindset where you're just like, yeah, let's go. Let's fucking learn Lua as wild as this might be.
Figure it out. Something will happen.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of like on my own prototyping, making like a little thing where we were like collecting these campers, and there's like a monster that had a flashlight, which because Don't Starve's engine didn't have any sort of directional lights, was actually a very like specifically controlled series of like 8 increasing size point lights that I would programmatically sort of move around the world as you aimed. Anyways, so I like prototyped for a little bit, and we were like, it's not really quite working. Like, what if we took the camera and made it like a third person kind of follow cam, and like really kind of threw all the rules of Don't Starve out the window. So it ended up being a little bit bigger scope than we had initially planned, and we tacked on, I think, like 2 weeks, but we ended up making this thing called the Screecher, which is sort of like a Don't Starve take on Slenderman almost. And that was a really good time. And then pretty shortly thereafter jumped over to working on Don't Starve, the main game. We were working on the Screecher kind of as the capper to the 6 months of free content updates that they did on the original game. And then it was myself, another designer, and 2 artists who were basically the entire team for the Don't Starve Reign of Giants expansion. And our kind of task was to figure out like how to make the game fresh again for people that have spent hundreds of thousands of hours in it.
Yeah.
So we went ahead and like added a couple seasons, built a bunch of new biomes and content and stuff. And that took about, I think, 4 months start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And during that period where we were making that expansion, we had a couple engineers kind of off to the side, who were getting started laying the foundation for all of the like online functionality for the thing that we had said over and over again will absolutely not happen, which was don't starve together.
Isn't it funny how those things, it's like the waves against the rock, you know? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, by the time we finished Reign of Giants, like we'd gotten the kind of basic functionality of multiplayer Don't Starve up and running.
Right.
And then
sorry, and just for our listeners, right, Don't Starve Together was the multiplayer release, the co-op
Yes.
release of Don't Starve that came.
Yep. Thank you for the clarification. I'm bad about just like, yeah, everyone intimately knows these shorthand names for things that I worked on, right? Like that. Yes. No, thank you. So I was the first designer on the team and sort of de facto team lead, which then like, you know, Clay doesn't really have hierarchy, but like sort of semi-formalized over the months. And my first task was to figure out like, okay, what does Don't Starve mean in a multiplayer context? What does death mean in a multiplayer context? Because we can't just like wipe your world anymore. So went about figuring out all that, and you know, it was pretty cool how just directly it kind of scaled. Like many hands make light work, but also many mouths make lots of food.
Many meals on the table.
Exactly. Work, so a lot of it really just kind of worked. But the like death and how that aspect of the game worked needed some proper design, as did like how do we keep a world healthy over long periods of time, because not all the resources would self-replenish, things like that. And I worked on Don't Starve Together for the first year or so of its development, seeing it through initial release and getting it up to kind of parity with both the base game and the Reign of Giants expansion. And then it was around that time that I headed south and went to work at Hangar 13 on Mafia 3.
Yeah, cool. Amazing. Yeah, really cool. And what it like, I mean, you know, Clay were just on an absolute tear at that point in time as well. Like, you know, the success trajectory.
Oxygen Not Included had just dropped as well.
Yeah, Invisible Ink. Was James on it?
Invisible Ink, yep. Which is like the hidden gem of their catalog, in my opinion.
So that's the hardcore Clay fans know that's the one, right? That's the crown jewel.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about your indie foray before we then, you know, swing back to Alex and hear about Ironwood.
So after Mafia 3 wrapped up, you know, I spent a few months like helping them retool some of their systems and stuff, and then I had the opportunity to join up with a couple of folks and start a company, and we're collaborating with a director, a film director, who I think I can't actually name and mention, but we had some funding for a prototype, and we were working on a pretty cool little thing, and we did that for about maybe 6 months or so of actually building the thing, and then we kind of like took a step back and just went about pitching it. Did not get full funding, which was exacerbated by the fact that, you know, we like our first round of pitches didn't land, and then we kind of retooled a little bit and like gave it a stronger theme, which ended up being like identifying patient zero, and then we pitched it again in April of 2020.
And it's going to go one of two ways there, right? It's going to be like, yes, this is the topic of the time. Let's go with our Contagion game, or let's like not go near.
Please get this game about viral spread away from me. Right.
I think the Plague Inc. guys did pretty well.
And right? You know, on the back of that, I was like, oh, maybe this is actually going to work out. Like, this feels absurd to be doing, but I think they sort of were the ones that benefited. I don't think there were a whole bunch of like disease spread games getting funded right about then.
And like, man, it is just like a really great example, and we never do want to be the example, but like of how much timing is a factor in everything.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Huge. And so what came after that? Like, I mean, I imagine you put that to bed after a certain amount of time?
Yeah. We like made a last ditch attempt to get it funded. And then I at that point had already moved to New York to teach at NYU at the Game Center. So I was teaching as we were kind of doing our last ditch attempt, and then after that subsided and I needed to figure out what was next, I started doing some consulting and, had like a couple spot gigs here and there. But Alex and I's mutual friend, Chris Floyd, who Alex had worked with at Oculus. At that point, Alex and his team had been prototyping for, I think, like 6 months. Is that right?
Yeah, something
thereabouts.
Like that. Yeah.
And they needed some more design help. So Chris was like, once again, I know a guy.
Yeah, Chris Floyd.
who can drive into this deep end. Yeah.
So folks know Chris Floyd as well as one of the original sort of like, I guess, heads of like the indie mega booth, right? Yeah. So, like help amazingly. And, Chris also said something to me one year that I was like, oh man, I wish I was like that. He was just like, I don't want any credit. I just want to like help people. And he did that behind the scenes along with
helping. Is that what he did?
Yeah, right. It's like, you don't want any of the credit. You don't want your face on the billboard. But him and Callie and Eric and that crew, like they did so much. There was such a beautiful pipeline in the indie mega booth of like studios that were commercial ready. And needed that kind of community or mentorship or peers solving the same problems at the same time as them.
A lift up, a stage to stand on, right? Like,
just
when the mega booth first hit PAX, like it was such a sea change of like the kinds of profile that any of those games would get, and just like the concentration meant that players could be like, oh, I'm going to wander these 3 rows and like I can guarantee that I'm going to see a bunch of interesting stuff, and that was like a real force multiplier.
So many of the larger sort of, or not even larger, but yes, larger and more successful indie studios, like a lot of the indie institutions and darlings that we know now were like in that generation of us coming up through the mega booth, like your Red Hooks and your Clays and like all of these other folks that came through. So it's really impressive the impact that it had, so much so that I think it was Concordia University maybe like did like a multi-year study on like what happened to studios afterwards and what were like the winning ingredients of the mega booth and everything. Really cool. It was cool as well to see, Callie try and get it off the ground again this year. But so that's cool. So now you're at Ironwood now, or you're at least talking to Alex.
Well, I was consulting initially. Like I thought the initial arrangement, like Alex. So first of all, Alex and I, like we had our intro call, and Alex had no idea what my background was at this point. He just starts telling me like about his game and his prototype and some of his inspirations, and Don't Starve is on that list. And I'm sitting here being like, I'm pretty sure I can have this job if I want it.
Yeah.
Seems like there's a good match there, since I was the face of one of the inspiration games for a couple of years. So,
you find now this time you've mastered it to the point where you've flipped it. Not only do you realize you're in a job interview, but the person interviewing you doesn't realize they're
I didn't know.
How many layers down can we go? Yeah.
All right. Well, look, let's pause it there because that's a perfect segue to go. Sure. Let's wind back, Alex, and you're thinking you've spoken about your sort of your inspiration now for getting Ironwood going. You're already tinkering around like in the background for many years on things. You've got this idea of at least what a studio shouldn't be, and some great experiences along the way that can help mold Ironwood into something special. What's like when were the first moments? Tell me when you took the leap and like what that meant.
I mean, so like early 2019 was when I started like thinking about it quite seriously. Like it wasn't at that point, it wasn't like maybe I could do this, but it was like, what should I actually know to do this? And of course, hindsight's 2020, and I didn't know what I should have known, and I didn't have the things that I should have prepped. But like, it was a lot of like watching a lot of talks on like pretty much every opportunity I could to talk with other devs, and watch GDC talks on how the things get pitched and like how does that process work, as well as starting to just think a little bit more around the kind of things. Like I've always had a genre of weird stuff that I like to pursue creatively, and I knew that was going to be an important part of it. And yeah, and I think September was when I finally quit, and Ironwood was officially formed in November.
Wow. And so you were at Oculus at the time in 2019, right? So you quit Oculus to then go and
Yeah.
do Ironwood. And you're in Seattle as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Which, someone said something to me when I was in Seattle talking to some devs there last year. I think Seattle has like the highest density of game developers in the world or something like that. It's like crazy. So like what a great place to kick off your studio as well if you're looking to your peers or folks who've walked the path before, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, there's definitely a lot of folks here. And then I think there's a big variety here too, right? Because you have your Microsofts and your Facebooks, and
Yeah.
all the way through to like super senior specialized, but still smaller, right? Like Bungie and Valve, and
Mm-hmm.
they're still hundreds of people, but not
Yeah.
thousands of people, down to like individual indie devs.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Really cool. And then all of like Seattle Indies as an institution that's been around for
Mhm.
ages and stuff. A lot of those, the communities
Definitely.
that can really help with this stuff. So was there a game, like was there a Pacific Drive at this point in time, or was there just an idea to bring people together and get something going, and Pacific Drive came out of that?
So there definitely was a game in mind by the time the company existed, right? Like we like the thought was it's going to be some form of driving survivally thing. But it was pretty ill-defined, admittedly. We had made effectively like a game playlist teaser trailer, and knew the high level beats, but hadn't fleshed it out much.
You did the
And
classic like make the trailer of your game to sort of understand it thing.
yeah, well, not to understand it, more to find money.
Okay,
Like it
right.
was,
Yeah, of course.
like we knew it was going to be, it was going to have a car. We knew there was going to be some type of survival mechanics there, because we were doing early prototypes where it was like drive down a road, like you have to get gas, but you have to use a resource that's part of the car to protect yourself, and vice versa. And there was going to be like an emotional component of just the moody Pacific Northwest, because like a lot of the early ideas and kind of emotional inspiration that I had over the course of the year came from exactly that. Was just driving around on my own, which is something I just like to do just in the area.
Yeah,
and
right.
so
heading to your internship, driving up and back.
Yeah, oh my God. I have done a lot of in the woods drives for sure. But we didn't know much, and we had actually initially were pursuing it as more of like an open world, like very not like cemented down, or not even like any kind of run approach, or no central garage. It was just like drive and go and explore this world.
Okay.
And like leverage procedural tech to build out as much as humanly possible. But one, just scope, and then I think a refocusing coming into 2021 led us down and I think you were there at that point in time, Seth, when we had like kind of
I
bailed
remember
out.
We had some early conversations about like shouldn't we do open world?
Yeah, for sure.
And the answer was no.
Yeah, it's so totally, which like, everyone, like any developer would breathe a sigh of relief at that. But, it's, it can be scary making these conversations and so far out from launch, right? Even thinking things like, well, do the gamers, capital G, want the open world? Do we need the open world for it to be commercially viable? All this sort of stuff. So walk me a little bit through that kind of decision, because it sounds like a big one.
I mean, I think it's multifaceted, right? Because there is both the very legitimate business approach. So when we had pitched to a bunch of different people, we had gotten the feedback like, hey, this is like not only like new team, like not fully staffed, brand new company, but like the budget was high. Like we were in that realm that wasn't like 10-15 million dollars kind of like big AA game at the time. We also weren't like $100,000-$200,000 very, very,
you're in
very
that sort of
small
triple
indie
I
project.
range.
Yeah, and so we were very high up there. So we were looking for legitimate ways to shrink the scope of the game. And then at the same time, we were like actually testing out what was working and what wasn't working. And there are ideas that we had prototyped that eventually made it all the way through to what eventually was just mechanics that we now see in Pacific Drive. But I think, Seth, correct me if I'm wrong, but ultimately we just tested it. Like we came up with like a very, very rough run-based approach, if I remember correctly, and that was the thing that we then played and talked about quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there was an acknowledgement even before we went and built that prototype that like, hey, look,
It's probably the way
open
to go.
world is
Yeah.
just gonna be like such a humongous undertaking, and for the size team that we've been talking about, like it's sort of a non-starter. So like, what can we do to sort of make something that is still compelling but doesn't have that sort of like fantasy of seeing a mountain on the horizon and driving to it.
Yeah.
And you know, that I think was around when we like realized how much of the heart of the game was the car and your relationship to the car. And then that sort of turned in like that realization and focus came from this prototype that Alex mentioned, where I think initially like our first experience wasn't even necessarily like a prototype that we built. It was just like house rules that we were playing by.
Yeah.
Where, you know, you would have to like go and find a MacGuffin and collect it and then like make a mad dash to the exit to sort of see what that experience was like if you have this kind of climactic moment that ends each foray into the zone, and also you know, like see what it kind of feels like to not have to like retread and sort of follow back the breadcrumbs that you left as a trail back home.
The value of the house rule prototype is totally understated in games. Like I remember talking to Ben Brode when I helped mentor him, and of course he basically needed none of it for his phenomenal GDC talk last year on Marvel Snap, and talking about how the actual snap mechanic was just his producer over his shoulder being like, would you double or nothing now? You know, like, would you snap now? Would you snap now? And like, he was just like, maybe. And like that vibe, like they didn't even implement it. They just like sort of role played it, you know, they just house ruled the thing. So effective.
That's great.
Yeah. All right. So I think it's a really great point to pause. And I'm going to throw it to either of you because I'm sure both of you have been doing it now for months and months. But like we should give our listeners, for those who aren't even familiar with Pacific Drive, which would be wild if that was the case, but there's going to be some out there. Give the elevator pitch of what the game is so folks understand how in February of 2024, a game studio made thousands and thousands of people collectively fall in love with a 1980 station wagon.
Jeez.
Dude, I can
go for it. Give us your best elevator pitch. What's the game?
So Pacific Drive is a survival adventure driving game set in a radiated exclusion zone in the Pacific Northwest on the Olympic Peninsula. And basically, you know, you end up getting trapped inside this terrible place where lots of things are going wrong, and you stumble upon this kind of beater station wagon. It's a legally distinct 1980 something Buick LeSabre, light blue with woody panels.
Yeah, it's like a woody station wagon, right? Like we all know the one from the 80s that had wood paneling. It's amazing.
Like National Lampoon's, like totally in that vicinity. And it is your lifeline. Like it's you in this car trying to survive in this strange and weird place. And basically, you know, you've got this home base that is your garage, which is kind of a respite and a place that you can kind of nurse your car back to health after each expedition and sort of repair and prepare for the next run, chart your course, plan your route, and then head out into the zone. And it's a survival crafting game at its core, kind of moment to moment. So you're driving around and collecting resources to keep your car running and to kind of, you know, build up a chest of resources that you can use to, when you get back to the garage, research new parts and craft new things. And, you know, along the way, you meet a couple characters, which actually I'll toss it over to Alex to do the sort of narrative parts of the elevator pitch, because that's much more his domain.
Yeah. So you end up, you find this car. Something is not quite normal with the car. You do encounter a couple of people that have either, you know, voluntarily or involuntarily kind of end up around the zone, and you get caught up in this mystery of what is strange about this car. and it's that mystery that is going to slowly reveal more about the characters. There is Oppie, who is a bitter, late 70s-year-old woman, very knowledgeable about the zone, but very just angry that you're there. It's her garage that you're in. And then Tobias and Francis are the two other main characters, and they're much more of the very passionate, like hell yeah, more mystery of the zone. Like let's go and figure out what's out there, like pursue that urban legend. But you get caught up in your own urban legend, and that is the kind of like pulling storyline to take you deeper and deeper and uncover what exactly is going on.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth providing the distinction for folks here too, like especially after all the chats we had about Seth's work on on Bioshock Infinite, Mafia 3, is that like when we talk about NPCs, it's that kind of Firewatch style of interaction, right? Where you're out on your own exploring and you're talking to folks over the radio and they're piping in and out as you're doing things.
It's a very solitary experience. The only kind of character, as it were, that you ever actually see on screen is the car.
Yeah. Because it's first person as well. So you're like getting in and out of the car.
Mechanically, it's like a first person, very embodied, immersive experience. You drive in first person, you get in and out of the car. You're taking parts off with your hands, putting on new parts with your hands. You're repairing using tools. It's kind of like it has roguelike run-based elements. It has procedural generation. It's an immersive sim. It's a survival crafting game. It's a driving game. It's a vehicle modification. Like there's just, it's a, the way that I've kind of described it is like it's a weird Frankenstein's monster of a video game. Like it's got extraction looter aspects to it. It's got sort of battle royale, collapsing storm. The quirk system is very much inspired by Return of the Obra Dinn. Like it's
and you
kind
better
of pulled
believe
in from all over places.
You better believe it has the best goddamn disintegration shaders you'll see in any modern game.
I didn't make them. Like those are
amazing. That's so good. What a punchline! All those years, the Padawan's become the master. That's it. You're
there you go. No, there's other very talented folks.
Well, let's actually pivot to that, Alex, because we've spoken about the game. We've spoken about how we sort of, you were pitching it around a little bit, and we'll follow that thread of the game and the concept and everything through. But I'm keen as well, your motivations about building a studio and a place and an environment. So around this, as someone who's done this before, built a game alongside building a studio or a team, they happen in parallel, right? And they're two different hats, So tell me about the parallel track here and, how that was going and sort of how you sort of led that.
I mean, it's very much multiple hats, and to be very straightforward, too many hats. Like at its worst, I was the CEO, I was the creative director. In some ways, I was the art director, and I was also doing a lot of tech art in the project.
Yeah,
it's just too many people or too many people's worth of things to do, and I think, there's obviously the reality, which is that you pick and choose which ones you have to do, which ones you want to do, which ones you delegate, and which ones you hire around. But it's, I don't make any claim to be a master of that. And even now, we're having conversations of like, okay, the game is out. Like, what does a rebalance, what does that time look like? Because with these, 10 to 20 person teams, there is still a lot of work to do. But
yeah, absolutely. The high teens I found is when studios really you can't get on without having like a full-time operations person, and that person's a lot of the time they're wearing multiple hats. But that's often when I'm talking to other developers or I'm in forums where they're like, hey, I think I need someone to do these things. And everyone will pipe in and be like, yeah, you're at that size. You need an ops person, and it was the same for us. And, producers or, the founders and stuff would manage a lot of that stuff leading up to it. But then you just get to a point where, as you're saying, Alex, it's just like there's too much work in regards to just team facilitation and, that you can do it all on your own at some point, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's a couple factors to mention. I think the first was, with my intentions around the studio, there was a lot of, I think, smart decisions made early on for the types of external groups that we work with to get help. So be it an external HR group or a bookkeeping, payroll, as many hyper specialized partners that we could work with that were similar to small like us, and we're able to just help out. That was a very, very beneficial thing, and a call that I made early on. I
Great
think the
tip.
other is like the folks that stepped up, because like this project, we're twice the size that we originally thought we would be back in 2019, and it's folks like Seth and Alyssa, our production director, and other folks on the team that have definitely stepped into bigger and larger roles. Like is
Yeah.
massively important.
Yeah, and I think we'll
crazy
talk about it a bit
appreciated.
later on as well. But it's worth mentioning too that you had a publisher as well, right? Like Kepler was handling the publishing and the marketing side of things too, alongside you. So specialists there
Eventually,
in that
yeah.
sense.
Yeah,
we
but
were
not right away.
self-published for a while.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
were
oh, that's right.
self-published
Yeah,
up
like
until this
did you
summer.
announce? Were you self-publishing when you announced? Yeah, right. So they came along sort of partway through there.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Interesting. And so I'm keen as well to hear, Alex, about the start of it, because I'm always, sometimes for folks it's you can take the leap, but then like how do you get that momentum? How do you get a prototype? How do you get like enough of a game so that you can have a trailer and pitch it around? Had you put aside savings? Were a bunch of you sort of working for profit? Like Mello, we did it famously for, like, we created this profit share system where people did it for sweat equity for a while, until we could actually convert it into like paying work. Like how did you bootstrap at the start to get to a point where you had something to shop around? Was it just you, or had you brought people on at that point?
So very, very early on, it was just me and then a couple of folks that were contracting, either part-time like Seth was at the start, or closer to 40 hours a week. That was one, like it was paid but very reduced, and there was like we have our own like royalty compensation system that we have set up. That was a big thing of trying to set that up the right way very, very early on. And then very small amount of like friends and family funding to get things started, but like it was very much like bootstraps, and good faith got to that initial point where we had that prototype of like, okay, this is the thing that we actually can pitch. And I don't mean
game,
this,
as they
I
say.
don't mean the fall of 2019. I mean like later in 2020,
like end of 2020, basically,
yeah,
right?
because that's what we did later. So we like kind of like Seth, timing, but quit my stable Silicon Valley like high paying job and start a company, and then the whole world kind of took a big shift to the left. And I mean, I was working remote for months before the lockdown happened, but all of everyone on the business end of things was like, we don't really know what's gonna happen, and so we hungered down through most of 2020 and kept working on a prototype, and like we all,
so
it really wasn't a lot of us.
You pitched this whole thing virtually, I imagine, as well, right? Like there would have been no actual meetups at that point in time, like when you were pitching?
Pretty much. Like especially in 2020. Like that was there was no on-site anything.
Yeah, because I think we sent off that build in like December or maybe October. It's like October, November.
October for sure, yeah.
I think we started hearing back in December. That's what I'm thinking of. Anyways, yeah. Like
So Seth, let's pivot back to the game now. Like obviously the pivot from open world to it felt like a natural one and a necessary one, but it's a huge shift. Were there walk us through some of those early days in the game, and some because as you mentioned, or sorry, as Alex was mentioning, like a lot of the mechanics that are in there now and the feature sets that make Pacific Drive, like that magical sort of Frankenstein's monster that you spoke about, they weren't there at the start. Like what were some of those early discoveries that really pivoted the game in the direction that
when I joined up in like it was I think July of 2020. At the time I thought I was just like sort of doing a one-off, like here's my assessment, I'm going to write a document and say good luck to you. But Alex suckered me in and I helped him out with some of the prototype stuff as well. Anyways, the first, so at the time, you could get in and out of the car, you could drive in first person. We had like a sort of like, I think the sort of directional compass thing was there, like the sort of blip radar kind of deal. But no map.
Really
at the
rough
time.
inventory.
Yeah, and you had an inventory. There was no like tool-based item collection. It was just searching containers, and all the car part swapping was done in like a meta UI, like a full screen.
Okay,
just like click around, and it was like presented nicely with like a cinematic camera of view of the car and everything like that.
But you were just like
but it
equipping
was
things like you would in
yeah,
other
you're just
games.
kind of
Yeah.
clicking buttons in a
As
menu.
opposed to it, just for the listeners, as opposed to now, as Seth was saying before, it's like literally hands on with the car, like you're holding a tire and then you're putting it on, and you've got tools that you're cycling through. And
that was like my first big recommendation. I in that initial write-up, like I had a bunch of words about like a structure and run-based thing and blah blah blah. But the other really big takeaway and like suggestion that I was making was to go full bore on making it like this embodied physical thing where you're like literally taking the parts off with your hands and making it tactile and physical and immersive in that way. Because, like I was saying earlier, Alex was like already pretty aware at that point that like the heart of the game was going to be the car and your relationship to the car and like caring about it. And so my insight there was like, look, if you want to get players to care about this thing, make them take care of it.
Yeah,
and then they will care.
Having a relationship without hugging anyone ever, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that when we built that like initial prototype of like, hey, you can kind of manually take parts off and on and hold them in your hands and carrying them around. Like that was, I think, the big kind of aha moment that was like, oh, okay, like this is what the game is.
Alex, were there any
there's lots more to figure out, but
yeah, Alex, were there any kind of wonky moments in finding the balance between, and as someone who comes from VR, this is a classic VR problem too, right? Is like level of, actual physicality with the car, like Far Cry 2 famously like went all out, like making sure your hands are placed on there, you're touching everything as you're getting in. But Pacific Drive, at least in my time with it, it's like making clever decisions about like, you're feeling like you're interacting with the car a lot of the time, but you're actually at a safe distance, and it's for ease of use of the player too, where you can just point at something and a little arc welding tool comes out. Or did you have a pretty clear idea and move through that, or were there some sort of wonky sort of dead ends trying to find your way through that balance there?
I don't think we ever strayed too far. I think one of the things that Seth and I were pretty on the same page about was that neither of us really wanted to get like annoyed with the general interaction and control. So like when it came to like friction, like when it came to like the density of stuff that you can interact with, like I would have loved to go in and make every single button on the like the console do something, and like there is the part of me that's like realism for realism fun, and that'd be good times, but like that's not like the most important part of that like experience, right? It's the ability to do that in the same way that we let you uninstall an engine with holding a button down, rather than going like super simulation and have to unscrew every bolt and stuff like that. It's the spirit of the thing, and I think that kept us pretty avoidant of a lot. But that doesn't mean there's not still hard things, right? Like you're in a car, which means in a game with an FOV in the 70s 80s, you can't see much, and that picking the camera position was something that like Seth and I and Jacob, our vehicle artist, spent a lot of time testing and playing with, and even trying really weird, like at one point we had a shader test where you got in the car and the entire nose of the car would bend down, and it happened seamlessly with the animation, and it wasn't much, but it allowed you just a little bit more of a view in front of you.
Games are weird, aren't they?
Games are weird. It's a weird droopy nose station wagon.
Weird shit like on Armello when we first got it running on the PS4, like rendering, we were like, great, well, it's rendering, but it's rendering upside down for some reason, just like the whole game upside down. You're like, okay, cool, sweet, all right. Some baby steps.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. So tell me a little bit more about the sort of some of the organic decisions that then fell out of these. Like you've got open world, you've now got this tactility, as we know as designers and, game creators, there are some decisions that when you make them, a bunch of other things come along as like a chain reaction, or, sort of attachments to that decision itself. Like, was that sort of what led you down the sort of the survival route in a big way?
To me, the survival stuff, at least the framework or idea of it, was there very early on, but what it meant to everything and how interconnected it could be was what, to me, it took off a lot farther as like the resource economy started to like actually represent itself. And like, it wasn't just, well, we know gas for the car and the gas makes the car go. It was, okay, well, what parts in the car do I want to make or fix and make a decision about? Like, those are incredibly cool moments.
Yeah. My favorite Pacific Drive moments are like hurtling like to the jump zone at the end or whatever, and you're like actually looking around in your car, like trying to that dual, like that immersion of being in there and like frantically looking out of your car just really grounded me in the world. It's so much fun.
I think that kind of experience, like the fumbling with your keys kind of moments, and like just sort of, I need to like crane my head around to see
the
what
amount of times I've like stepped on the gas and the car's not on, and I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. And like, so that even just with the limited set of anomalies we had at the time, it was pretty clear that like there was interest and drama to be had just from like the sort of like approachable and easy to use but fiddly kind of approach to interacting with this vehicle and steering it around the world. As well as, like the sort of like physicality of it all, and the way that led to like, okay, like all the status effects that can happen to the different car parts need to be sort of physically represented, and you need to be able to sort of like with your eyes diagnose what's going on to a degree. And then obviously there's UI to sort of further clarify that, but that sort of commitment early on to go so deep on that immersion and sort of simulation, not that it's like a simulationist game, but it has everything that you would expect to be there. Like, if you drive over a sharp thing, your wheel is going to get flat. You have a rear view mirror, you have side view mirrors, and if you have your door open and you reverse through a tree, it will get torn off its hinges.
I learned that pretty early on as well. Yeah.
I mean, it's
some of that stuff we didn't manage to like tackle and implement until quite a bit later, but it was a pretty natural sort of cascading sequence or series of like decisions and mechanics and systems that just sort of like plugged in together in ways that though the survival stuff was there from the outset, and like the sort of transposition of like your core meters, as it were, of like hunger and thirst onto the car in terms of like fuel and battery. Like that part was very straightforward, and we knew that we needed like some survival crafting mechanics around that to buoy that. But it took us a while still to kind of suss out whether or not like, the player should have accrued radiation exposure or hunger or thirst. Like those, we were still toying with those ideas for quite a while. And as we continued to invest in like flat tires and cracked windows and busted engine, like smoking engines and blah, 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 leaking fuel tanks, etc. Like we just found like, actually there's plenty of plates to spin just taking care of this car, and we don't need any more like additional survival aspects.
Yeah. Alex, you've mentioned, the sort of the line, and Seth touched on it too before, between like realism and where something becomes a game and you remove elements of friction and stuff. And the spectrum here for survival games is just like, it's infinite, right? And there are numerous games all along. And, you guys have kind of got this brilliant kind of, almost like a red herring in this, not a red herring, I can't think of the word, but, like you kind of distract people from the fact almost that it's a survival game because it's a completely new format with the car and everything from what we've seen a lot of the time. But was there a weird parallel or like a particular survival game that the two of you early on were like, this survival game, like, whether it's Don't Starve or whether it's, Zero Seavid or something, or, DayZ, was there a game that you were like, this one does the balance well and we're going to like, not obviously copy it, but, like that's a good North Star in regards to the balance of this friction and realism and all of that sort of stuff. And we're going to do that with a car, or how can we sort of find the analogs for that?
Sorry, I'm laughing because I think Alex has an answer to this question, but my answer is I hate survival games.
On this podcast, bonus points for things that you don't agree with too. So, let's hear yours, Alex. Like, what do you feel?
I mean, definitely like Subnautica, I think was very much in my head. But I think one of the things that I actually think that this complicated the decision and like discussion around balance so much is the fact that when you die in the zone, the game doesn't end, but you lose your stuff. Yeah. So whatever kind of economy and like progression that you have can be hard to reset, and how much we buffered that player's like recovery, how much we punished them, that that definitely we iterated on that quite a bit over the course of development, and like
Because
there
you
were
did
times,
end up in a Dark Souls sort of point where you can go and then retrieve your things in the next run,
Yeah.
right? Like you have the little graveyard.
Yep.
Because
And there's some
my
rubber
experience
banding
with the
mechanic
game
as well.
was literally the first run. You know, I took my time and I was like, build it, or stacked it to the brim, and then just got lost in finding my way to the jump, lost everything, and sat there back at the garage being like, fuck. No. And then it wasn't. And then on the next run, I saw the little grave icon and I was like, a wave of relief came over me. I was like, oh, thank God. All right, okay.
Excellent.
So, and you know, actually it was really fun ferrying things from my like husk of the station wagon back to the new one. Like there was a real, as opposed to, you know, in Dark Souls where you just like walk over the top of the thing or press A and boss by. Yeah, right. It's it was a real sort of like a pantomime about it, you know, or this sort of enacting it that felt like weirdly pathetic as a character in the game, you know. So tell me a little bit about that, like this back and forth, or you know, Alex, what was it that you were really concerned about? Was it that sort of moment that I had that devastating like feeling of?
It was not that moment. It's whatever moment you had the next time you went out. So like having tension, right? Like knowing that there is a genuine risk to the unknown, and not like I could just go back and reload, or but that there are consequences to the things and weird mysteries that are out in the game was, I think, something that was a core part of the like not knowing what's around the corner and trying to keep people on their toes. Because one of our goals in early prototyping was, how do we make people drive carefully? Because when we started prototyping, people would just floor it. They would just like, all right, whatever. And some people still play that way, but it's a pretty hard way to play the. Yeah, well, me too now. I think at this point, but it is a hard way to play the game because there are those consequences. And so encouraging players to stop and think about what they're doing in a bunch of different ways, whether it's thinking about loss of items, but like to your point around the diegetic like aspects of it, our map is purposefully not visible when you drive. Like you have to turn and look at it.
Yeah, look at it.
Means you're not looking where you're going.
Yeah.
Well, one of our pillars relating to that was defensive driving in a dangerous environment.
Yeah.
And this was something, and part of what also, this was like part of our reasoning to do a run-based thing as well, is like, we really didn't want players to get to a point where they just like, they know what's over the next rise. We want them kind of eyes glued to the road in front of them, and kind of constantly in this state of like surveying and making kind of split-second decisions about like, oh, do I go left or right, or do I just go through? Like, what's the best path here? And we didn't want people playing the UI. We didn't want people playing the map. We wanted people like actually driving and like being, again, you know, physical, embodied, immersed in that moment, in that cockpit experience. That I think makes it all kind of click together pretty well.
So Seth, you were both laughing when I asked you what your sort of your pillar or your shining star survival game is and where you land on the spectrum. So like, tell me what yours is, and then tell me about like the two of you and sort of how that conversation.
I cannot stand survival games. I get so
but this is bored. The thing, right? Like sometimes the best games are made by people who hate the genre, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have a bunch of quality of life stuff because of your thoughts on survival games. Like
exactly right. You come to it. I mean, Ty, our creative director and co-founder, he often stated with Armello, his goal was to fix Talisman, the board game. So like, just came in as like, fuck Talisman. Was like kind of one of his driving forces for his game.
That's amazing. Yeah. So, I mean, I wasn't like necessarily trying to fix survival games, but I was trying to make like a survival game for people that don't necessarily have that patience. And obviously there's still some amount of resource grind in the game. But we're actually just briefly working on an option that we're going to be shipping hopefully sometime over the summer that allow you to like use a slider to adjust the craftiness of the game. How many resources do you need to collect? Very, very excited about that one.
Yeah, cool.
But, you know, to Alex's point, like my general distaste for survival games did mean that it was important to me that we like do a bunch of quality of life stuff to kind of get rid of a bunch of the fuss that you often find and jank that you often find in survival games. So like an example here is when you're crafting, it just automatically pulls from all your inventories. You don't have to like go and put the right things for the thing that you want to craft into your backpack so that you can then make it.
I got a man, Seth Rosen. Thank you so much. You know how like that was my biggest bugbear, like with Starfield, like when I was like, because I gave that a good 50 to 70 hours or something, and that was like the one I could never figure out. I'm like, does it need to be on me? Is it taken from? Is it from this chest or what? And I was that
Just
honestly,
don't think
like
about it, man. Like it's not worth it.
It's like I have it. I brought it from this other fucking planet. It's in a box in this room. Just let me craft the thing.
In the ship somewhere. I swear to God, just make the goddamn item.
But it is funny, this balance, right? Because as I said, when you guys made me ferry my 40 t-shirts from one trunk to another, it's fucking awesome, right? So it's like it's this weirdly like contextual and contradictory thing that it's hard to navigate as designers.
Yeah, and that's the job of a designer to a large degree, is like knowing where to insert and where to remove friction. And to sort of take a step back and maybe more properly answer your question instead of just giving you the finger about it.
That's been our relationship for many years, Seth.
Nothing new. So I hadn't played Subnautica until probably at least halfway through the development of Pacific Drive. But once I bounced off it a couple times, like a friend had suggested it to me, and I was like, I don't want to fucking punch rocks. No, thank you. But Alex kept talking about it. I was like, all right, there must be something to this thing. I should give it a whirl. And the thing that I think Subnautica does really well is it provides intrigue to exploration. Like I playing Subnautica, I felt similar to my very first times playing Minecraft, where I was like, if I start digging, I don't know, or if I start walking, I don't know what I'm going to find. And it's like
that surprise and delight,
sort of scary and prickly. Like I've been kind of working on this spectrum of survival or really crafting experiences, often crafting experiences of like tree punchers to tree huggers. Tree punchers being games where like your entire relationship to the world is extractive, and basically everything that exists there is an enemy to be fought or a resource to be harvested. And ultimately what your objective in these kinds of games often is building a monument, building a giant base. And it's very kind of self-directed in that way. Whereas tree huggers are a thing where you're like, oh, that's a weird looking tree. Let me touch it, see what happens. And Don't
like
Starve, I think, is a good example of this. No Man's Sky has some of it. Outer Wilds, a game that has sort of surprised me that we've been getting compared to, has a bunch of it too. Like, it's not a survival game per se, but it has a lot of this element of like, I don't quite understand the rules of this world, and the world doesn't even particularly care that I'm here. Like, it's just an ecology, and I have to figure out how to slot into that. Like, I think those kinds of survival experiences tend to be, at least to my taste, much more interesting than just like, okay, I gotta get the axe so I can make my club to get the furs to get the, all that kind of like sort of just simple resource loop. Like, obviously you need some of that just to make the game tick and sort of provide the time investment, because ultimately survival games are just time management sims. That's all it is. It's just spinning plates. It's smoke and mirrors and things to sort of distract you from what you actually need to be doing, which is to maintain some meter. And
everything's just currency conversion to some kind of time measure, right? Yeah,
exactly.
So, Alex, now to throw to you to sort of like capstone this survival conversation, like, how do you think you landed on this spectrum, and how happy are you with it? Are there things that, you joked before about touching every button, but are there genuinely things that you're like, I wish we had a bit more realism or friction there, or we were going to do this thing but we couldn't get there in the end, or like these things worked out really well? Like, how do you feel you landed now, seeing the product like with the hindsight of being a couple months post launch?
I think one of the things that I'm particularly proud of is just the diversity of moments, and I think that like we made, especially like late in the project, made some really
Sorry, your diversity of moments, did you say?
Yeah, diversity of moments that the player can just run into, right? Like, my car in this weather with this anomaly and this thing created this kind of event that happened. And I think we made some very smart decisions along the way to reinforce those, and I think now, looking at it, those are the kind of things where like I start to wonder what else can get tied into that, right? Like what other moments or like interesting things can we lean into even farther, like to reinforce that discovery, right? Are there ways to discover that we aren't doing or that we could explore further? But I'm very happy with that aspect for sure. Like it's
Mm.
just hearing all of these car stories and then hearing the different filters. Like I have forgotten to put my car's brake on in the game, and that's happened to me years after working on it, and I find it funny.
Yes.
But I
Chasing your car as you're like walking to something, and then you come back and you see it rolling down the hill.
Forgetting
yeah,
is for
I've
cowards. Just never put it in park.
Yeah.
I've heard so many different reactions to that, from frustration to happiness to
Yeah.
like just sheer disbelief that a developer would put that in the game. Like, why is that a thing? Like, it's wonderful, and I love when that comes together with those pressure moments, right? Where
Yeah.
it's here's a moment, but now I've got this like surface level motivation. Like, it's one thing to stub your toe, it's another thing to stub your toe on the way to the airport, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, what a great analogy.
so yeah, that for me, that's definitely a very very strong aspect.
So, Alex, I'm keen to talk to you as well about, we've spoken to Seth a lot about, NPC interaction and everything. And, even some of the tips that Seth gave it through his time were about what were really like anchored in actually interacting with those characters in a space, or even seeing them, or even like audio cues to be able to turn your attention to them. But the challenge that you had on Pacific Drive is that they're never there, right? They're like, it's this, like I said, this Firewatch style interaction where it's over the, which I think, was obviously a big part of BioShock, the original one too, right? Like you rarely see them until you're fighting them, right? Like,
Yeah.
Tell me, Alex, like how you sort of navigated those challenges, and what do you think was, because, I've seen folks stream the game, and I've seen people like sort of build not just an emotional relationship with the car, but like these characters really, they're invested in the intrigue and the characters themselves. So what do you think helped sort of propel the success of the NPC interaction, and what were sort of some of the challenges there?
I mean, the challenge is definitely it's even less than Firewatch. In Firewatch, you can like scroll and pick a response, and we
That's
didn't even get
true.
that.
Yes. Yep.
And so and then also the main character of Firewatch is a character.
Yeah.
Which means that you're telling the story of, obviously with some agency, you're telling the story of someone that naturally fits into the universe. And I was very much like an early proponent of not having a named protagonist, because I wanted the relationship that people built with their car to be authentic. Like, I wanted it to be you and the car that is yours, not a hand me down from another NPC. Like, this isn't a card that someone gives you.
Yeah.
And those two things combined meant, like, in actuality, it is a very desperate relationship, right? Like, they are separated out. To get around that, I think obviously the lion's share of it goes to just the quality of the script, the quality of the performances, and
Yeah.
I think like some clever decisions around where and how the dialogue actually does trigger in the moment. Like we did end up keeping some dialogue effectively optional, because we never knew what the player was going to be doing when all important line X or Y had to happen.
Yeah.
But I think another part of it really came down to like the structure of the story and the goals that we were trying to tell. Like we as with all stories, right, we jammed on a bunch of different ideas, and it took us a while to start narrowing it down to not the story of the zone, but a story in the zone, and then
Yeah.
making that story personal to you and making those goals align with your own, so that we could reduce as much like natural friction there that comes up, where it's like, if you were given this goal of, I don't know, something that didn't match with you as a person, then there's always going to be like that extra dissonance there. And trying
Yeah.
to remove that and say, no, you've got your car, you need to figure out what's going on, because you need to get out of the zone, and you need to, not mysteriously wander into the woods one day and never come back. And like aligning those and then tying it to a very small set of characters, I think helped keep things really focused.
Yeah. And it's the writing is phenomenal in the game. It's really quite impressive how much, like you say, you're not interacting with the dialogue or the NPCs in any way, like even choosing your responses, but it's coming at you, and it feels like it's coming in strangely at the right time and everything. And It's the run based narrative too is a challenge in and of itself. You know, we had survival or run based games for many years without actually anyone daring to put a narrative to it, right? As I think Hades came along and cracked that open in a big way.
Yep.
You know, in
And
really
I reached out to Greg Gasavin, in fact,
Oh, great.
of Supergiant, to like pick his brain a little bit about like, okay, like what are we actually biting off here? Like,
Yeah.
in order to make this thing feel meaty and like satisfying and like to stay fresh over, you know, hours and hours and hours of gameplay, like what does that actually look like? How did you approach it? How much do we need, et cetera, et cetera. So he was really, really helpful in helping us like figuring out just how big a bite we were taking.
Do you remember any like salient like advice or anything that really hit hard or you sort of took to the bank afterwards?
The biggest thing that I took away from it was like, just make as like, don't stop, keep making as much dialogue and lines as you can. Like,
yeah, to fill
because
those runs
the more specific and the more endless it can be, the like, that's the ticket. You just need an enormous amount of stuff, which, you know, like we figured out some ways to modulate that a bit. We didn't take that as a directive.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean.
But so that was like not necessarily surprising, but still sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like I didn't necessarily think of like about that as the solve, but it makes sense.
Yeah, it almost sounds crazy to say that, right? Like just make more shit, just like go crazy. Like you're like, oh, okay, that is the answer. Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
And then you've got the added challenge too of like now you're doing post launch support and everything for the game, right? And so you've got this narrative where not only do people have to interact with that narrative, you know, in like through just like an arc of finishing the game, so to speak, quote unquote, but now you've got people who are like playing it beyond release. Alex, was there like and forgive me, I haven't gotten enough through the game to see if it unlocks some sort of like new game plus mode or just like a free range mode with no narrative or anything, but like how are you approaching these narrative challenges of survival games and run-based games, but now also with like adding post-launch content and everything?
So, you know, one of the things that we it's like no secret, and we've definitely shared for a long time, is that you do have the ability to stay in the zone and to just keep doing stuff, because there is a lot to do, right? There's a huge tech tree. There's a lot of things to go and scan and unlock. You know, some of it, I think, is ultimately going to come in the form of like, you know, narrative delivery techniques that we maybe set up that are easy to build on. But the big answer is that we're looking and figuring that out and seeing, hey, is this something that we fit into something larger? Is this something that you know, maybe made sense in more bite-sized content? Seth, you've been connected more on that front than
I mean, we like that was actually you were asking earlier about sort of the decision point between open world and run based kind of structure, and this exact question was a big part of why we went for a run based structure, because by chunking things into these sort of small open world instantiated individual levels that you then string together in order to put together one full run, that makes it much easier to slot new content in. And it makes it sort of extensible in a more scalable way, as well as, you know, puts it into a sort of play structure where you know, I think we have some work to do before we're really there, but like it has the capacity to sort of grow and change into being like a lifestyle game where you get home from work each day and like do your one Pacific Drive run and kind of have that sort of relationship over a longer period of time with the game, even outside of that main narrative. And that was something that, you know, in 2020, whenever we were making this decision, this 2020, 2021, like we knew that the landscape had already kind of shifted to that approach where, you know, if you're a small to medium game, and frankly even larger game, like people just expect you to keep supporting the thing and keep like growing it and changing it and like making it a thing that you can kind of play for a long period of time. So it was something that was very kind of factored into our decision making early on. And like Alex was saying, you know, we're still figuring out a little bit of like what that looks like. Like we're prototyping new sort of like mission activities that we can kind of use as sort of building blocks for a new experience. figuring out like sort of an endless mode or a challenge mode or something like that. Like we're kind of experimenting with all these different things that can take that run-based structure and twist it and shape it or fill it up with new stuff to kind of keep it fresh for players and keep them coming back for more.
Hell yeah. Really exciting stuff. It is great when you get on the other side of a release and you do have the luxury and the privilege of being able to support a game post-release, as we saw for many years on Armello. Like it's really exciting, like the sort of the verdant green that's there, right? And the possibilities with, and it's almost like I find that through a game's development, you're really focused on that vision and keeping things tight, and you've got the scope and everything. But when there's this kind of the possibility of open-ended development on a game, it really, and then the game is finished, it then sort of opens up as like a platform for multiple different directions. It's really liberating and enjoying.
Yeah, like there's this adage of like, when you're making a game, there's the first 90% and then the second 90%. But then once you've finished that second 90%, there's almost like this third 90% where you're like, okay, now that we fully understand what this game is and we have like mature tools to make it and like are practiced at making content for it, like what can we get up to? Like what kind of mischief can we make?
Yeah. All right, so Alex, now let's sort of put ourselves in the mindset that we're in now. Like you've released the game, you've obviously had this. You and Seth have been working together, obviously, with the rest of the team to bring this thing to life, and debut title as well for Ironwood, just absolutely amazing. But like, I really want to sort of lean on you now for your thoughts about like leadership and how you went sort of setting up the studio. You like you said, you didn't just have this idea for a game and then it all the means justify the end, like let's just like get this game done and that was the North Star. You had this idea of like building a space for people, even if it's not a physical actual one, but like an environment where people can come and you don't commit the crimes of the past that you've seen others commit and everything. How do you feel you went with that, and how are you feeling about Ironwood at the moment?
I mean, it's one holy shit learning experience, right? Like there's no other way to summarize everything in a succinct way. It's been a lot. Like I think we made some very smart decisions around the nature of the company in terms of like support, but also growing from a team of 1 to a team of 18 is always going to be challenging, right? And especially when you're mid-production, trying to figure out the right amount of time to split between the game, and especially for me, like the game, the company, like looking forward, there's financial stuff, there's my own survival game of plate juggling going on there that is definitely always present. And I think like looking at it critically, like we definitely weren't perfect through production, like me especially, like I said, like I was serious about learning. Like it still is like a almost daily thing where something new will pop up that I've never dealt with before, I've never seen before. I am insanely appreciative for those around me and the patience while I learn. But also, others around me having their own growth mindset, right? And being down to continually improve. And now that we have that chance to take that breath and, like you're saying, look at that third 90%, we're also doing the same on the company side, right? Like, what are things that, man, we wish we could have done, 6 months ago, a year ago, but we were wrapping up the game? Is it a subscription to like a website that we've been going off of the trial version for way too long? Is it something bigger than that? Is it staffing? Is it, who knows what? But I think that's very much like a big part of my brain for the next while is going to be heavily looking at.
I know there'll be a number of folks listening to this podcast and this episode who, whether they work at a studio now, even somewhere like big, like, Oculus, or whether they're just trying to get into game dev, they'll have a particular degree of aspiration where it is a studio that, it's a 7-figure game and they have a team of a dozen or more. Is there anything that, if it was a book or it was a podcast or a mindset or something that someone said to you, was there something that sort of, has helped your leadership journey up until this point that you would say to these folks who are about to dive into it? I mean, the NVIDIA CEO recently said in an interview that, they asked him, what would you do again? If you got the chance? He was like, I wouldn't, like it's no one starts a studio, they know what they're getting into. But like, if you could pass on some advice or some, some like resources or something, what's helped you along the way in that learning experience?
I think for me as someone who came up from development, right, and pretty recently too, right? I've been
Yeah.
doing this for over 10 years, but I'm not, a 30-year seasoned vet of director level roles or something. I would say don't don't undervalue or under respect the amount of work that everything that isn't the game takes.
Yeah.
Because it all impacts it. It all is connected. Like it does not matter how how great your team is if all of a sudden payroll isn't a thing, right? And I mean, it sounds extreme, but like the consistency and like the continual like moments of growth and learning and mistakes and then learning from those mistakes, those don't stop, and they take significant effort. And I think uh if I were talking to myself even like 2 years ago or something like that, where I was halfway through this, it'd be honestly saying the same message as like, don't undervalue or like not respect enough the effort and impact that some of those things can have.
Mm. Yeah, it's it's really great advice. And there's something that you said in there that really makes me think about, you talk to so many studio heads, and the theme is that like they're very tired, right? And I think it's like, and how
Yes.
hard it is. And there's something to be said about, the resiliency that it takes to just continually, like you say, like there's a rhythm, like some things, payroll has to happen every fortnight or whatever you're paid. Like there is the hungry beast, the money needs to come in. There are just things that need to happen at a particular point in time. You've got people working for you, have their own families, they're putting food on their table via your studio, your company, right? But then there's like the ad hoc things that you're learning and the mistakes that you're making along the way. My communications mentor at one point said to me, I was telling her I was like a bit overwhelmed with this stuff, and she was like, you need to plan for 50 random events every week. She's like, if you don't have enough time in your schedule for like, and they can be little things or big things. And also the other thing I found as a studio head too is I think we could safely say that someone goes through a major life change or event or something like that once every 3 years, right? Whether that be a divorce, a death in the family, moving house, some health issues or something like that.
An early baby.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, I know you had a staff member who went through, a similar thing, like, big life change at like a crucial point in production. Like, but if you have 5 people, that's, and it's happening once every 3 years, you get 1 or 2 a year, maybe. As soon as you start to scale, when you have 50 people, 100 people or something, that's like, you're getting them every week, twice a week, like someone on your team going through something that they hadn't foreseen or a big major life event. And it's like that constant resilience to be able to be there alongside. And this is why I think so much, leadership really works well when you're obviously uplifting and facilitating others to support you and the rest of the team and leading together, because it is so hard, right? It is the resilience and the energy that it requires, like in a leadership position, to like hold that space is a lot as a studio head, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. Long-winded way of saying I agree. Great advice.
50 things in a week, that checks.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, and then you still got your tasks in Jira or whatever too on top of that.
Yeah.
Seth, is there anything, you're a game director on this thing. Like, is there anything, obviously it's a leadership experience, even if you're not running the studio, but like leading a team and holding that creative vision in many ways alongside Alex, is there something that you took from this and that perhaps from more of a game direction or a creative leadership spin that you would pass on to folks?
Don't assemble your team as you're assembling the plane, as you're landing the plane.
Classic.
We like set out to make a certain game, and it grew in ways and shrunk in ways. But I think like I certainly overestimated my ability to get task work done, while also kind of mustering the team and like making sure people understood what it was that we were making, because in the case of Pacific Drive, like not very many people on our team had necessarily like worked on similar experiences. Like we had a ton of general game dev experience, but not necessarily a lot when it came to like sort of the immersive sim or like procedural generation or survival crafting stuff. So I had, I think, a slightly outsized or not necessarily outsized, but like larger than average job of like kind of getting people to understand and deeply internalize what it was that we were making and like why it fit together in the ways that it did. And I don't think I did a good job, to be clear. And part of that is because not everyone that was finally on the team was there in a period when it was like slow enough that we could be having those conversations. But I another part is just like, we were punching very far above our weight. And that meant that like I was kind of flying around and not getting to do the sort of like mentorship and guidance that is actually the job of a director. Like, it's
a really great
feels
way
sort
to
of
put it. Yeah.
silly to frame it this way, but your job as a director is to give direction.
Yeah,
that is not
teach as well,
to
and
prescribe what needs to happen, but to point someone in the right facing and then say, this is what your goal is, go and achieve it. And I can think of moments on the project where like I was able to kind of like have those kinds of conversations with designers on my team and course correct them with like, oh, like, it seems like you didn't quite understand like what purpose this is serving or like how it's layering into the experience. Like, let's chat about that and get on the same page. And then once we kind of had that alignment, things were a lot more successful and things really clicked into place. So, I think to sort of wrap that up and bundle it as some sort of advice, like build in time to do that alignment. It is really easy to just be caught in the current of making the thing and sort of go along with the momentum of building video game. But I think it, especially once you get past like 10 people, once you're in that teens range, like it cannot be overstated how important it is to like actually make sure that everyone understands what it is that you're making. Like we did an exercise we had like a all hands on site thing recently. We did an exercise modeled after Zach McClendon's big board yard sale design process. There's a talk on YouTube from the NYU's practice conference, if that is a thing that interests you. Also a really good talk. Anyway, so had the team kind of like in their own words say like, all right, what is Pacific Drive? Like what makes it tick? What are all the important aspects to it? And it was such a gratifying moment for me to just like see how far the team had come in terms of like really deeply understanding what it is that we'd made and kind of how all the puzzle pieces fit together, like all the different body parts of the Frankenstein.
And how aligned you were sort of towards the end.
Yeah. So I think that's one big thing. And then, the other thing I'll mention is something that I still need to remind myself of. But the best question in game development is, what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. Kerry Patel just gave an amazing talk on that last year. She's game director over at Obsidian. And I believe the talk is literally called The Most Important Question in Game Design. Right,
nice.
or in game development, right? And it's literally, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Like, what are we trying to achieve? And she talks about, all of the frameworks that she and her team at Obsidian worked through for that. And I think as well, one of the things that really helped me click with, again, working with leaders on our team who are game directors or game directing myself, you're absolutely right in regards to that balance of like, okay, we've got to move at breakneck speed. And I'm a very talented or very, I'm talking to the Royal, I believe I'm talented, but I'm talking generally here.
I agree,
as a game director or as a, creative leader, you're like, okay, I'm a talented individual practitioner. I have maybe a particular amount of expertise or experience in this thing that my team don't, or this designer that I'm working with, or whoever it might be. And you're balancing like the classic thing, the folly that a lot of leaders fall into is like, I could just do this myself and we got to move fast. So I'll just tell them what to do. But there is I kind of got this dichotomy thinking about the way that Valve goes about a lot of their work, and from the Valve Employee Handbook is like really what you're throwing up is a short or a long-term decision there, right? Like you're talking about short-term benefit of like, we've got to keep moving, I'll get this, but it doesn't teach, like you're saying, it does directing teachers, right? It gives people a framework to move within and find their own way and effectively learn through almost like play or exploration and a safe space to fail with you there guiding them.
When we were talking at GDC, you used this phrase, freedom within a framework, which I really, really like.
Love it. Yep, exactly. That's like Trent catchphrase as well. I've been saying that for years. It's so good. It's so true. Freedom in a framework, 100%. All right. Hey, look, there's a couple of great snippets there. Thank you, both of you, for your vulnerability, your candor. Like, not just obviously congrats on the game and the success that you've seen for it, and what's to come, I'm sure, with the stuff that you have planned, but congrats on your experience, Alex, and Seth, with the studio, and achieving something like just getting a game off the ground as a debut studio, with caring about people and how it's made, and I'm really excited to see not just what you do with Pacific Drive in the future and games to come after it, but like what the studio looks like.
So are we.
Yeah. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much.